Jake Morrison guided his cargo ship through the final approach to Port Haven Station, his hands moving across the control panel with practiced ease. The station hung in the darkness of space like a massive wheel, its lights blinking in patterns that welcomed traders from across the galaxy. Jake had been making this run for 3 years now, ever since he left Earth's military and decided that hauling cargo was safer than fighting wars. The docking computer chirped as it received clearance, and Jake let the autopilot take over for the final connection. Port Haven was one of those places where rules mattered less than credits. A frontier station where humans mingled with dozens of alien species. Most of those species still looked at humans like they were primitive newcomers to galactic society that suited Jake just fine because being underestimated often gave him advantages in negotiations. The docking clamps secured his ship with a metallic clang that echoed through the hull. Jake checked his manifest one more time before heading down to the cargo bay. He needed to pick up supplies, maybe grab a decent meal that wasn't freeze-dried, and then get back on his route. Simple and profitable, just the way he liked it. The station's main corridor buzzed with activity as Jake stepped through the airlock. Tall insectoid Thraney merchants haggled with stocky Dravian traders, while slim Velcaran diplomats glided past in their flowing robes. Humans were still rare enough here that a few aliens turned to look at him with multiple sets of eyes. Jake ignored the attention and headed toward the supply district, his boots clanging on the metal deck plates. That was when he noticed the commotion near the lower market entrance. A hooded figure stumbled through the crowd, moving with desperate urgency. Behind her came 4 armed guards wearing the distinctive silver and black armor of the Vulcaran Empire. The guards pushed through the crowd without care, their weapons drawn and ready. Something about the way the hooded figure moved caught Jake's attention. There was fear there, real terror, not the usual panic of a thief or smuggler. The figure glanced back, and Jake saw a flash of pale blue skin and wide amber eyes before she darted into a narrow service alley. The guards followed without hesitation. Jake knew he should mind his own business because getting involved in alien politics never ended well, but his feet were already moving toward the alley. Drawn by some instinct he couldn't quite name, the alley was dark and cramped, filled with the hum of ventilation systems and the drip of condensation from overhead pipes. Jake heard voices ahead, sharp and commanding in the Vulcaran language. He moved closer. Staying in the shadows, the hooded figure had backed into a dead end, trapped between cargo containers and the smooth station wall. The guards had their weapons raised, speaking in rapid Vulcaran that Jake's translator implant struggled to follow. Then the figure spoke in perfect galactic common, her voice steady despite the obvious fear. "I am Princess Syrah of House Vulcaran, and I invoke the ancient right of sanctuary." One of the guards laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. "There is no sanctuary for traitors, girl. Your uncle is emperor now, and he wants you brought back alive. My uncle murdered my parents and seized the throne through treachery," Syrah said, pushing back her hood to reveal elegant features marked with bruises and exhaustion. "The Galactic Council will never recognize his rule." "The Council has already declared this an internal matter," another guard said, moving closer. "No one is coming to save you." Jake stepped out of the shadows, his hand resting on the plasma pistol at his hip. "I wouldn't say no one." All 4 guards turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from surprise to contempt when they saw he was human. "This doesn't concern you." "Primitive," the lead guard said. "Walk away while you still can." She asked for sanctuary. Jake said calmly, "Where I come from, we don't ignore that kind of request." The guards exchanged glances, clearly amused by the human's audacity. "You're outnumbered and outgunned," the lead guard said. "We serve the Vulcaran Empire and have full authority to retrieve Imperial property." "She's not property," Jake said, his voice hardening. "She's a person asking for help." Syrah stared at him with those wide amber eyes. clearly shocked that this stranger was defending her. "Please," she said quietly. "I have nowhere else to turn. The Empire hunts me across every world and station." Jake studied her for a moment. Seeing the genuine desperation in her face, he knew. Helping her meant making enemies of one of the galaxy's major powers. His ship wasn't built for combat, and he had no backup but looking at this young woman, cornered and terrified. He couldn't just walk away. "My ship is in docking bay 12, he said to Sarah. "Can you run?" She nodded quickly. Jake's pistol cleared its holster in one smooth motion. Not pointing at anyone yet, but ready. "I'm gonna count to 3, and then we're leaving. Anyone who tries to stop us is going to have a bad day." The guards raised their weapons, clearly not taking the threat seriously. 1. Jake said. The lead guard stepped forward. 2. Sarah moved closer to Jake, gathering her robes. "You don't want to do this." "Human," the guard warned. 3. Jake fired a burst at the overhead pipes, and superheated steam exploded into the alley. The guards stumbled back, shouting in confusion as the corridor filled with white vapor. Jake grabbed Sarah's hand and ran, pulling her back toward the main corridor behind them. He heard the guards recovering and giving chase. "This way," Jake said. Ducking into a maintenance passage that most aliens didn't know existed. Humans were smaller than most species, which meant they could use routes others couldn't. Sarah followed without question. Her royal robes hiked up to allow her to run. They emerged 3 corridors away, and Jake keyed his comm unit. "Vagrant, this is Morrison. Prep for emergency departure and unlock all access routes to Bay 12. His ship's computer acknowledged with a soft chime. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked as they hurried through the crowded market. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to know you to see someone needs help," Jake said simply. They rounded a corner and nearly ran into a station security patrol. Jake pulled Sarah into a shop selling exotic foods, ducking behind displays of strange fruits through the window. He watched the security officers receive a message on their comm units. Their expressions changed, and they immediately began sealing the corridors. "They've issued a station-wide alert." Jake muttered, "We need to move fast." He led Sarah through a maze of shops and service tunnels, using every trick he'd learned in 3 years of operating on the frontier. Twice more, they narrowly avoided patrols. Finally, they reached the entrance to docking bay 12. Jake could see the vagrant through the windows, his reliable old cargo hauler waiting patiently. But between them and the ship stood 6 more Valkyrian guards, and these ones looked much better equipped. "Jake Morrison," a voice crackled over the bay speakers. "Surrender the princess, and you will be allowed to leave unharmed." Jake looked at Sarah, then at his ship, calculating angles and odds. "What do you say?" "Your Highness," he asked with a slight grin. "Feel like trusting a primitive human one more time?" Sarah's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "Yes," she said. "I do." Jake smiled and drew his pistol again. "Then hold on tight, because this is going to get interesting." Jake fired 3 quick shots at the bay's control panel, and the emergency systems activated with blaring alarms. The beven days the mev and a lyrican lair liorans. Lights shifted to red, and automated fire suppression systems began pumping foam into the docking area. The guards stumbled through the sudden chaos, their sensors overwhelmed by the foam and flashing lights. "Run!" Jake shouted, pulling Sarah toward the vagrant. They sprinted across the bay floor, dodging between cargo containers and maintenance equipment. One guard managed to clear his vision and fired, the energy bolt searing past Jake's shoulder close enough that he felt the heat. Jake returned fire without looking, just trying to keep the guards pinned down. They reached the vagrant's boarding ramp, and Jake slammed his hand on the emergency access panel. The ramp dropped with a hydraulic hiss, and they scrambled aboard. "Vagrant, seal and launch," Jake commanded as he ran for the cockpit. The ship's computer responded immediately. The ramp closing behind them as the main engines began their startup sequence, Sarah collapsed into the co-pilot's seat. Breathing hard. "They'll seal the bay doors," she said. "We'll be trapped. Watch and learn," Jake said, his hands dancing across the controls. The Vagrant's engines roared to life, and Jake didn't wait for proper clearance. He punched the thrusters, and the ship lurched forward, racing toward the bay doors that were already beginning to close. Sarah gripped the armrests as the gap narrowed. "We're not going to make it. We'll make it," Jake said with absolute confidence. The Vagrant shot through the closing doors with maybe 3 meters to spare on each side. The ship's hull scraped against one edge with a screech of metal on metal. "But they were through." "Impossible," Sarah whispered. "You shouldn't have been able to thread that gap. Velkaran pilots wouldn't have tried," Jake said, already plotting their escape vector. "That's why they think it's impossible behind them." Port Haven Station grew smaller as Jake pushed the engines to full power. Then his proximity alarm screamed. 3 Velkaran warships dropped out of hyperspace, their sleek hulls bristling with weapons. "Unidentified cargo vessel. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded," came the cold command over the com. Jake ignored it, his mind already calculating angles and velocities. "Those ships are twice our size," Sarah said, fear creeping into her voice. "They'll destroy us if we don't surrender." "They won't destroy us because they want you alive," Jake said. "That gives us an advantage." He banked hard toward a nearby asteroid field, a dense cluster of rocks that orbited a dying star. "You're going into the field?" Sarah asked in disbelief. "Standard Velkaran. Navigation protocols forbid entering asteroid fields at high speed." "Good thing I'm not Velkaran," Jake said with a grin. The Vagrant plunged into the field, and Jake's world narrowed to pure instinct and reaction. Asteroids tumbled past them in a deadly dance. Jake wove between them, his hands moving across the controls faster than Sarah could follow. He rolled the ship to slip through a gap barely wider than the hull, then dove under a massive spinning rock behind them. The Velkaran warship slowed, trying to navigate the field with their sophisticated sensor systems and careful calculations. One ship attempted to follow Jake's route and immediately had to veer away as an asteroid clipped its shields. "Primitive human," the Velkaran commander snarled over the comm. "You'll kill yourself in there." Jake didn't respond, too focused on the flying. He spotted a cluster of smaller asteroids ahead and aimed straight for them at the last second. He killed the main engines and fired only the maneuvering thrusters. The Vagrant spun sideways, sliding through the cluster like a dancer. Sarah made a small sound of amazement. One of the pursuing warships tried to match the maneuver and miscalculated. It clipped an asteroid and began tumbling, its hull breaching in several places. The other 2 ships pulled back, unwilling to risk the same fate. Jake emerged from the far side of the field and immediately jumped to hyperspace. The stars stretched into lines, and then they were away. Safe for the moment, Sarah sat in stunned silence as Jake began running diagnostics on the ship's systems. "You flew like no one I've ever seen," she finally said. "Where did you learn to pilot like that?" "Earth military, fighter squadron," Jake said absently, checking the hull damage. "After that, smuggling runs through the Saturn rings, where one mistake means you're paced. But you're just a cargo hauler now. Cargo hauling is safer than getting shot at," Jake said. "Usually." He turned to look at her properly for the first time since they'd escaped. "Speaking of which, Princess, you want to tell me exactly what I just got myself into?" Sarah lowered her eyes. "I am sorry, truly. You risked everything for someone you don't even know." "Already did the risking part," Jake said. "Now I need to know why your own people want you dead." Sarah took a deep breath and began her story. She told him about her father, Emperor Thane, who had ruled with wisdom and compassion for 40 years, about her mother, Empress Lyra, who had worked to bring the Empire's client species into true partnership rather than servitude, about her uncle Viren, her father's younger brother, who had always been jealous of the throne. 3 cycles ago, there was an explosion in the Imperial Palace, Sarah said, her voice hollow. My parents were killed instantly. My uncle claimed it was an accident, but I knew better. Jake listened in silence as she continued. I found evidence in my father's private files. Communications showing Vaoran had been planning the coup for years. But before I could present it to the Council, his forces came for me. Why didn't you go to the Galactic Council right away? Jake asked. I tried. Sarah said bitterly. They declared it an internal Velkarin matter. They said, without proof, they couldn't interfere in Imperial succession. And your uncle controls all the proof now. Yes, Sarah said. He's consolidated power quickly. Too quickly, which means he had help, powerful help. Jake rubbed his face, suddenly feeling very tired. So what's your plan? Where are we going? There's a colony world called Tharsis Prime on the Outer Rim, Sarah said. My mother's sister governs there. If anyone would shelter me, it would be her. And how many jumps away is this planet? 3, Sarah admitted. Through Imperial-controlled space. Jake laughed. A short bark of sound. Of course it is. Why would it be easy? His comm unit chimed and he checked the message. It was from an old military contact, Lisa Chun, who now worked in Earth's diplomatic corps. The message was short and concerning. A bounty had been placed on Sarah's head. 50 million credits for her capture. Every mercenary, bounty hunter, an opportunist in the sector would be looking for them now. Jake showed Sarah the message and watched her face fall. I'd made you a target, she said quietly. I should leave. Find another way. Too late for that, Jake said. Besides, something you said about your uncle bothers me. What? You said he's moving too fast, making big changes. That means whatever he's planning, he needs you gone before he can really start. Sarah nodded slowly. He wants to militarize the Empire. Turn it into a conquering force instead of a stabilizing power. Then stopping him isn't just about you getting your throne back. Jake said, it's about preventing a war that could consume half the galaxy. Yes, Sarah said, but what can we do? We're just 2 people in one small ship. Jake grinned at her. Princess, let me tell you something about humans. We don't need big numbers or fancy technology to make a difference. He pulled up a star chart. Studying the routes to Tharsis Prime, we've got 2 choices. We can go through Imperial space, which is faster but more dangerous. Or we can go through the Crimson Belt. The Crimson Belt? Sarah's eyes widened. That's pirate territory. Even the Empire doesn't patrol there. Exactly, Jake said. Which means your uncle's forces won't expect us to go that way. But the pirates will kill us or sell us to the highest bidder. Maybe. Jake admitted. But pirates I understand. Fanatics loyal to your uncle. Not so much. He set the course for the Crimson Belt. Get some rest, he told Sarah. We've got 8 hours before we reach the first waypoint and you look like you haven't slept in days. Sarah started to protest, but exhaustion won out. Thank you, Jake Morrison, she said softly. I don't know why you chose to help me, but I won't forget it. Jake watched her leave the cockpit and settle into one of the passenger bunks. He turned back to the star chart, studying the route ahead. Behind them, somewhere in hyperspace, Commander Zek received his orders. The Emperor's most elite hunter was now on their trail. Jake didn't know it yet, but the real chase was just beginning. The Crimson Belt earned its name from the reddish dust clouds that filled this region of space. Remnants of a supernova that had exploded millennia ago. Jake guided the vagrant through the haze, his sensors struggling to penetrate the interference. This was exactly the kind of place where pirates thrived. Hidden from the law and from each other. We're approaching the refueling depot, Jake announced as Sarah entered the cockpit. She had slept for 6 hours and looked considerably better. though the worry never left her eyes. "Will it be safe?" she asked. Jake snorted. "Safe is relative out here. But we need fuel and supplies if we're going to make it to Tharsis Prime." The depot appeared through the red dust. A ramshackle collection of connected modules that looked like they might fall apart at any moment. At least a dozen ships of various sizes were docked there, none of them looking particularly friendly. Jake brought the vagrant in carefully. Watching for any sign of trouble, a gruff voice came over the comm. "State your business." "Cargo hauler. Just need fuel and maybe some food that doesn't taste like recycled plastic," Jake replied. There was a pause, then a laugh. "Bay 7. Keep your weapons holstered and your credits ready." Jake docked and turned to Sarah. "Stay close to me and don't make eye contact with anyone." They walked down the ramp into the depot's main corridor. Air smelled of machine oil, spilled liquor, and unwashed bodies. Pirates and smugglers of every species filled the corridors, conducting business in low voices. Jake kept one hand near his pistol as they made their way to the fuel station. He was paying for the refuel when he noticed eyes turning toward them, more specifically towards Sarah. Despite her efforts to stay hooded, her royal bearing and graceful movement marked her as different. Jake finished the transaction quickly. "Time to go," he muttered to Sarah. They turned to leave and found their path blocked by 6 large figures. The leader was a Krogan, a species known for their size, strength, and violent temperament. His name was Vesh, and his reputation in the Crimson Belt was legendary. Well, Vesh rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "What do we have here?" "Just passing through," Jake said evenly. "Don't want any trouble." Vesh's eyes, all 3 of them, focused on Sarah. "That's funny because I think you brought trouble with you." "Human." He pulled out a small data pad showing Sarah's image and the bounty amount, 50 million credits. "That's a lot of money for one little princess." Sarah tensed beside Jake, but stayed quiet. Other patrons of the depot were backing away, sensing violence was about to erupt. "She's under my protection," Jake said calmly. "Walk away, and we'll forget this happened." Vesh laughed, and his gang joined in. "Your protection? You're one scrawny human with an old ship. I could snap you in half." "Probably," Jake admitted. "But you'd have to catch me first, and I'm betting I'm faster than you." The Krogan's laughter stopped. "You have spirit. Human, I'll give you that. But spirit won't save you from broken bones." Jake glanced around the depot. At least 20 pirates were watching now, all of them calculating whether they should join Vesh or wait to see what happened. "How about we settle this properly?" Jake suggested. "You and me, hand to hand, no weapons." Vesh looked genuinely surprised. "You challenge me to combat?" "Unless you're afraid," Jake said with a slight smile. The watching pirates murmured at that among pirate culture. Refusing a direct challenge was a sign of cowardice. Vesh's face darkened with anger. "Very well. Human, when I'm done with you, I'll take the princess and collect my bounty." A space was cleared in the depot's central area. The proprietor, a scarred Dravian, set up boundaries with cargo containers. "No weapons. Fight until one yields or can't continue," he announced. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. "You can't do this. He's 3 times your size." "Don't have much choice," Jake said, stripping off his jacket. "Stay back and be ready to run if this goes bad." Jake stepped into the makeshift ring, and Vesh cracked his massive knuckles. The Krogan stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in thick scales that served as natural armor. Jake was lean and quick by human standards, but looked like a child next to Vesh. "Last chance to surrender." "Human," Vesh growled. "Ladies first." Jake replied. Vesh roared and charged. Jake dove to the side at the last second, and Vesh slammed into a cargo container, hard enough to dent it. The pirates cheered. Enjoying the show, Jake didn't wait for Vesh to recover. He moved in and delivered 3 quick strikes to the Krogan side. Targeting the gaps between scales, Vesh barely seemed to notice. He backhanded Jake and sent him flying across the ring. Jake hit the deck hard. Tasting blood, he rolled aside, just as Vesh's foot came down where his head had been. The metal deck plate crumpled under the impact. Jake scrambled up, his ribs screaming in protest. This wasn't working. He couldn't match Vesh's strength or durability. He needed to fight smarter. Vesh charged again, and this time Jake didn't dodge completely. He let the Krogan's momentum carry him forward while Jake grabbed his arm and used his own force against him. Vesh stumbled, but recovered quickly. Clever, the Krogan admitted, but tricks won't save you. They circled each other, and Jake noticed Vesh favoring his left leg. Slightly an old injury, perhaps, or just tired muscles. Jake filed that information away. Vesh lunged, and Jake met him head-on this time. He took a crushing blow to the shoulder, but managed to get inside Vesh's guard. Jake struck at the Krogan's throat, his knee, his eyes, any vulnerable spot he could find. Vesh roared in pain and anger. Grabbing Jake and lifting him off the ground, he threw Jake across the ring again. Jake landed badly and felt something crack in his chest. He struggled to breathe as Vesh approached. "You fought well, human," Vesh said. "But this ends now." Jake looked at Syrah standing at the edge of the crowd. Her face showed fear, but also something else. Hope, maybe. Belief that this primitive human could somehow win. That thought gave Jake strength. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "Not done yet," he wheezed. Vesh looked impressed despite himself. "You should be unconscious." "Most species would be after that throw." "Not most species," Jake said. "Human." He wiped blood from his mouth and smiled. "We don't know when to quit." Jake charged, and Vesh met him again. This time, Jake fought with pure desperation and cunning. Didn't try to match Vesh's strength. He used every dirty trick he knew: eye pokes, throat strikes, pressure points. He grabbed a handful of the red dust from the floor and threw it in Vesh's face. While the Krogan was blinded, Jake swept his injured leg. Vesh went down hard, and Jake was on him immediately. He got behind the Krogan and locked his arm around Vesh's thick neck. "Yield." Jake gasped. Vesh struggled, his strength still overwhelming, but Jake held on with everything he had. Tightening his grip, the Krogan's movements became weaker. The crowd had gone silent, watching in disbelief. Finally, Vesh tapped Jake's arm 3 times. The universal signal of submission. Jake released him and collapsed onto the deck. Gasping for air, Vesh lay there for a moment, then slowly sat up. He looked at Jake with what might have been respect. "You fight like a demon, human," he said. "I've never seen anyone refuse to stay down like that." Jake managed a painful laugh. "Earth is a tough planet. Makes tough people." Vesh stood and offered his hand after a moment. Jake took it, and the Krogan pulled him to his feet. "The bounty is yours to keep," Vesh announced to the watching crowd. "Anyone who touches the princess or the human answers to me." The pirates grumbled, but none challenged Vesh's authority. Jake limped over to Syrah, who immediately began checking his injuries. "You're insane," she said, but there were tears in her eyes. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Jake said, wincing as she probed his ribs. "And now we have safe passage through the belt." Vesh approached them, carrying a datapad. "Human, before you go, you should see this." He showed them an intelligence report about Imperial fleet movements. "Your princess's uncle has dispatched Commander Zik to hunt you. He's the best tracker in the Empire." Jake's expression hardened. "Where is he now?" "According to my sources, he's waiting at the next jump point," Vesh said. "He predicted you'd come this way and set a trap." Syrah looked at Jake with fear. "Zek is legendary. His ship is a battle cruiser. We cannot fight him." "Then we don't fight," Jake said. "We outthink him." Vesh studied Jake with those 3 eyes. "You have a plan?" "Working on it," Jake admitted. He turned to Syrah. "How well do you know the jump point near the Helios neutron star?" Her eyes widened. That area is incredibly dangerous. The radiation and gravity fluctuations make it nearly impossible to navigate. Nearly, Jake said with a grin. But not completely, Vesh laughed. A booming sound. You're either brilliant or suicidal, human. Maybe both. He handed Jake another datapad. Detailed scans of the Helios system. Consider it a gift for the entertainment you provided. Jake nodded his thanks. One more thing, Vesh said. Why are you doing this? Risking everything for an alien princess? Jake looked at Sarah, then back at Vesh. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Where I come from. That's reason enough. Vesh shook his head in amazement. Humans. You're all crazy. Probably, Jake agreed. They returned to the Vagrant, and Jake plotted their course. Sarah tended to his injuries. Her touch gentle, despite her noble upbringing. You surprise me constantly, she said. Quietly, your people are considered primitive by galactic standards, yet you show more courage than most so-called civilized species. Maybe that's because we haven't forgotten what it means to fight for something that matters. Jake said. He activated the engines, and they left the depot behind ahead. Of them waited Commander Zek, and the most dangerous part of their journey yet. The Helios neutron star burned in the distance, a dense remnant of a collapsed sun that twisted space itself. With its immense gravity, Jake studied the sensor readings as they approached the jump point. Radiation levels were off. The charts and the gravitational fluctuations created zones where navigation became a nightmare. It was exactly the kind of place where a smart hunter would wait for prey. I'm detecting a ship, Sarah said from the co-pilot station. Imperial signature. Battlecruiser class. Jake nodded grimly. Vesh's intelligence had been accurate. Commander Zek was here. Waiting. The comm system activated, and a cold, precise voice filled the cockpit. Cargo vessel Vagrant. This is Commander Zek of the Imperial Battlecruiser Sovereign. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. Jake didn't respond. His eyes scanning the tactical display. The Sovereign was positioned perfectly, blocking the direct route to the jump point. It was 3 times the size of the Vagrant and bristled with enough weapons to vaporize them in seconds. Jake Morrison, Zek continued, clearly having done his research. You have shown remarkable resourcefulness in evading capture thus far. But this ends now. I'm offering you a choice. Surrender Princess Sarah, and you will be allowed to depart with a full pardon and compensation for your troubles. Sarah looked at Jake, her amber eyes wide. You should take it, she said quietly. You've done more than anyone could ask. Save yourself. Jake ignored her and opened a comm channel. Commander Zek. I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to decline. There was a pause. Then Zek spoke again, his tone colder. You're being irrational, human. You cannot possibly escape, and fighting will only result in your death. Maybe, Jake said, but where I come from, we don't abandon people who need help. Not for money, and not to save our own skins. Your loyalty is admirable if misguided, Zek replied, but ultimately futile. You have 30 seconds to comply, or I will disable your ship and take the princess by force. Jake killed the comm and turned to Sarah. I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that? She nodded, though fear showed clearly on her face. What are you planning? Something incredibly stupid, Jake admitted with a grin. He brought up the data Vesh had given him, studying the neutron star's radiation patterns and gravitational fields. The Sovereign was holding position at a safe distance from the star. Exactly as Jake had expected, Valkyran ships were designed for efficiency and safety, not for taking risks. Human ships, on the other hand, were built by people who routinely did impossible things. Jake plotted a course that made Sarah gasp. You're going to fly directly at the battlecruiser? Not at it, Jake corrected. Past it. Then around the neutron star in a slingshot maneuver. That's suicide, Sarah said. The radiation will fry our systems and the gravity will tear us apart. It would tear apart a Velkaran ship, Jake agreed. But the Vagrant is human-made. We over-engineer everything because we expect things to break. He started diverting power to the shields and structural integrity fields. Plus, I've done this before, well, similar in the Saturn rings. Saturn doesn't have a neutron star. Sierra pointed out. Details. Jake said the 30 seconds expired and that Sovereign's weapons powered up. Jake didn't wait for them to fire. He punched the engines to maximum, and the Vagrant shot forward. Zek clearly hadn't expected such an aggressive move. The battle cruiser's first volley missed as Jake jinked the ship sideways. Impossible, came Zek's voice over the COMM. No pilot can react that quickly. Jake didn't bother responding. Too focused on flying, he wove through the Sovereign's weapons fire, using every bit of speed and maneuverability the Vagrant possessed. The battlecruiser tried to match his movements, but it was too large. Too slow. Jake flew under the Sovereign's hull, close enough that Sarah could see the details of its armor plating. Then he aimed straight for the neutron star. Jake, Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. The radiation levels are critical. I know. Jake said, hold on. They plunged into the neutron star's influence zone, and immediately the ship began to shake. Alarms screamed as radiation flooded the hull. The gravity field pulled at them, trying to drag them into the star's crushing embrace. Jake fought the controls, using the gravity as much as fighting against it behind them. The Sovereign attempted to follow. Commander, the radiation is too intense, came a voice on the open channel. We must pull back. Continue pursuit. Zek ordered. The human cannot survive this. We only need to wait for his ship to fail. But the Vagrant wasn't failing. Jake had routed power through redundant systems, using backups for the backups. The ship groaned and protested, but held together. Sarah watched in amazement as Jake flew by instinct as much as by instruments, seemed to feel where the gravity wells were, sensing the currents of space like a sailor reading the wind. The Sovereign tried to match their course and immediately ran into trouble. Its sophisticated sensors were blinded by the radiation. Its precise calculations were thrown off by the gravitational chaos. One of its weapon arrays exploded as the radiation overloaded the power conduits. All ships, pull back, Zek commanded, anger clear in his voice. We cannot follow them through this. Jake saw his opening. He adjusted course and skimmed even closer to the neutron star. The gravity grabbed the Vagrant and flung them around in a tight arc. The acceleration pushed both Jake and Sarah back into their seats. The ship's hull temperature spiked dangerously high, and then they were through, shooting out the other side of the gravity well at incredible speed. Jake immediately adjusted course for the jump point behind them. The Sovereign was struggling to extract itself from the neutron star's pull. It had ventured too far in trying to catch them, and now paid the price. Damage report. Jake called out, hull integrity at 60%. Sarah read from the display. Multiple systems overheated but functional. We lost one thruster, but the main engines are good. Jake aimed for the jump point, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. The Sovereign finally broke free of the gravity well, but by then it was too late. The Vagrant jumped to hyperspace and safety. Sarah sat back, breathing hard. I cannot believe that worked. Told you to trust me, Jake said, though his own hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. How did you know we could survive that maneuver? Honestly, Jake said, I was about 70% sure. Sarah stared at him. 70%? Maybe 65, Jake admitted. She started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. You're completely insane. You're not the first person to say that, Jake said with a grin. He checked their course. They were on their way to Tharsis Prime with no pursuit, but the victory felt hollow because Jake knew what awaited them. His sensors were already picking up signs of increased Imperial activity around the colony. "Sira," he said quietly, "I need you to look at this." She checked the long-range sensors and her face went pale. "There's a fleet blockading Tharsis Prime. At least 20 ships." Jake confirmed. "Your uncle must have figured out where you were heading." "Then we've lost," Sira said, despair creeping into her voice. "We can't fight that many ships, and I can't reach my aunt or the Loyalists." Jake was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he straightened in his chair. "What if we don't try to sneak past them?" "What do you mean?" "What if we go straight at them?" Jake said. "Draw their attention. Make them focus on us instead of the planet." "That's suicide," Sira protested. "We barely survived one battle cruiser, and now you want to face an entire fleet?" "I don't need to defeat them," Jake explained. "I just need to keep them busy long enough for you to reach the surface and rally the Loyalists." "No," Sira said firmly. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. This isn't just about you anymore." Jake said, "Your uncle is planning to turn the Empire into a war machine. If he succeeds, millions will die." He turned to face her. "You said it yourself. The Loyalists need you to lead them, but first you have to reach them." Sira's eyes filled with tears. "You're asking me to let you die. I'm asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing." Jake said gently, "I didn't survive Earth's military in 3 years in the frontier by being reckless. You flew through a neutron star's gravity well. Calculated risk." Jake said with a slight smile. "This is too." Sira reached out and took his hand. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk everything for me, for my people?" Jake thought about that for a moment. "Because someone has to stand up when things are wrong," he said. "Finally, because the galaxy needs people who still believe in doing the right thing even when it's hard." He squeezed her hand. "And because I've seen what you could be, Princess. You're not like the other Imperial leaders. You actually care about people. The galaxy needs that more than it needs one cargo pilot." Sira looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's make this count." Jake plotted their final approach to Tharsis Prime. The Imperial fleet waited like a wall of steel between them and their goal against any reasonable odds. One human and one exiled princess prepared to change the fate of an empire as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Jake activated the comm and broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Jake Morrison of Earth aboard the Vagrant. I have Princess Sira of House Vulcarin and I'm bringing her home." The response was immediate. Every ship in the Imperial fleet turned toward them. Jake smiled and pushed the engines forward. "Hold on, Princess," he said. "This is where things get really interesting." The Imperial fleet moved as one, 20 warships changing course to intercept the single cargo hauler that dared challenge them. Jake watched the tactical display and calculated angles and probabilities. He couldn't win this fight through strength or firepower, but he didn't need to win. He just needed to survive long enough. "Sira, get to the escape pod," Jake said calmly. "What?" "No, I'm not leaving you. You have to," Jake insisted. "I'm going to lead them on a chase through the upper atmosphere. While they're focused on me, you'll take the pod down to the surface. They'll destroy the pod. Not if they don't see it." Jake said. He pulled up a map of Tharsis Prime. "There's a canyon system on the northern continent, deep enough to hide the pod's signature if you time it right. I'll draw them away, and you'll have maybe 5 minutes to get down undetected." Sarah's hands trembled, but she nodded. "What about you?" "I'll figure something out," Jake said, with more confidence than he felt. "Now go." "We're almost in range." Sarah moved to the escape pod bay, but paused at the door. "Jake Morrison, when this is over, I'm making you a lord of the realm whether you want it or not." Jake grinned. "I'll settle for a good meal." and a full tank of fuel. She disappeared into the pod, and Jake sealed the hatch. Then he opened a channel to the Imperial fleet. "This is Jake Morrison. I'm told you boys are looking for me." The response came from the flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed every other ship. "Surrender the princess immediately, and you will be granted a quick death. How about this instead?" Jake said, "Come and get her." He dove toward Tharsis Prime's atmosphere. The Vagrant's engines screaming, the Imperial fleet followed without hesitation. Exactly as planned, Jake hit the outer atmosphere, and immediately the ship began to shake from friction and turbulence behind him. The larger warships struggled with the atmospheric entry. Their shields flared bright as they pushed through. Jake used the planet's weather systems to his advantage. He flew through a massive storm front, the lightning and wind making sensors unreliable. Then he skimmed along a mountain range, forcing the pursuing ships to climb or risk collision all the while. He monitored the escape pod's descent. Sarah was following his instructions perfectly, using the canyon system to mask her approach. The pod touched down, and its signal disappeared. Phase 1 complete now. Jake just had to survive. Phase 2. He pulled up sharply, climbing back toward orbit. The Imperial ship smashed his move, cutting off potential escape routes. "You cannot run forever." "Human," came the Admiral's voice. "Eventually your fuel will run out or your ship will fail." "Good thing I'm not running then," Jake replied. He aimed straight at the flagship. The Admiral clearly thought Jake was attempting a suicide run. The dreadnought's weapons powered up, ready to vaporize the cargo ship at the last second. Jake rolled the Vagrant and fired his maneuvering thrusters. The ship spun beneath the dreadnought's hull, close enough that Jake could see the gun ports. He fired his remaining missiles, not at the ship itself, but at the sensor arrays along its underside. The explosions blinded the flagship. Temporarily, Jake used those precious seconds to break away, but he wasn't fast enough. Energy bolts from escort frigates caught the Vagrant's engines. Alarms screamed as systems failed. The ship began to tumble, its main power failing. Jake fought the controls, but it was no use. The Vagrant was dead in space on the surface of Tharsis Prime. Syrah emerged from the escape pod. She was in a dense forest near the coordinates Jake had provided. She ran through the trees, her royal robes torn and dirty behind her. She heard the sounds of the Imperial fleet bombarding something in orbit. Her heart ached, knowing Jake was up there, probably dying to give her this chance. She couldn't let his sacrifice be meaningless. Sarah reached a clearing and found what she was looking for: a hidden bunker, camouflaged to look like a natural rock formation. She entered the access code her aunt had given her years ago. The door opened and she descended into a command center filled with armed soldiers. They turned at her entrance, weapons raised, and someone shouted, "Princess Sarah." General Kane pushed through the crowd. He was her mother's most trusted military advisor, presumed dead in the coup. "Your Highness, we thought you were lost." "Not yet," Sarah said, "but I will be if we don't act now." She explained everything: her uncle's betrayal, her flight across the galaxy, and Jake's desperate gambit to get her here. "We have to broadcast the truth," she said. "Show the Empire what Viren has done." Kane hesitated. "Princess, we're barely holding this position. The Imperial fleet has us pinned. They have one human keeping them busy right now." Syrah said fiercely, "Are you telling me the entire Loyalist force cannot do what one cargo pilot managed?" Her words struck home. Kane straightened. "What do you need?" "Access to the planetary broadcast system," Sarah said, "and every piece of evidence we have about the coup." Within minutes, they were ready. Sarah stood before a camera, battered and exhausted, but with fire in her eyes. "People of the Vulcaran Empire," she began, "I am Princess Sarah, daughter of Emperor Thane and Empress Lyra. 3 cycles ago, my parents were murdered by my uncle Viorin in a plot to seize power. I have proof of his crimes." She presented the evidence. Documents and recordings that showed the conspiracy communications between Varen and his co-conspirators, final records showing payments to assassin security footage that revealed the truth about the palace explosion. My uncle plans to turn our empire into an engine of conquest. Syrah continued. He will enslave client species and launch wars of aggression. But we can stop him. Not through violence, but through truth and unity. I call on all loyal citizens, all those who remember what our empire stood for, to rise up, stand with me, and we will restore honor to House Volcaran. The broadcast went out across every channel, reaching ships and planets throughout the empire in orbit. The Imperial fleet received the transmission. Confusion spread among the crews. Many had believed Voran's lies that Syrah was a traitor. Now they saw the truth on the flagship. The Admiral stared at the screen in shock. Is this real? He demanded his second officer check the documents. Sir, the evidence appears authentic. These are verified Imperial encryption codes throughout the fleet. Ships began to power down their weapons. Some even changed their transponder codes. Declaring for the Loyalists, the Admiral made a decision. All ships, cease fire and hold position. I want independent verification of these claims before we continue. Jake Morrison floated in the crippled Vagrant, his emergency life support barely functioning. I'd watched Sarah's broadcast on his flickering display. A smile crossed his battered face. That's my girl, he whispered. Then his sensors detected something. Ships were approaching, but they weren't firing. They were Loyalist vessels that had broken from the Imperial fleet. The lead ship opened a channel. Human vessel Vagrant. This is Captain Lin of the Defiant. We're here to help. Jake laughed, the sound turning into a cough. I could use a tow and maybe a medic. They brought him aboard the Defiant and treated his injuries through the ship's windows. Jake watched as more vessels declared for Syrah. The tide was turning on Tharsis Prime. Syrah stood in the command center as reports flooded in across the Empire. Loyalists were rising up. Military units were refusing Voran's orders. Entire star systems were declaring for her. General Kane approached with a grim smile. Princess, we're receiving word that Voran has fled the capital. His regime is collapsing. Syrah closed her eyes in relief, then she opened them with determination. Prepare a ship. I need to address the Empire from the capital, and I need Jake Morrison found and brought to me immediately. 3 days later, Syrah stood in the Imperial throne room. The ornate chamber had been restored after Voran's hasty departure. Loyalist forces controlled the capital and most of the Empire. Her uncle was in hiding. His supporters scattered the Galactic Council, embarrassed by their earlier refusal to help, had formally recognized her as the rightful empress. But Syrah didn't care about any of that at the moment. She watched as Jake limped into the throne room. Supported by a medical brace, he looked terrible. Bruised and bandaged, but alive. You came, she said, relief flooding through her. You told me I was getting a meal and fuel, Jake said with a weak grin. I'm here to collect. Syrah laughed and came down from the throne. She had prepared a grand ceremony, titles and honors befitting the human who saved her. But looking at Jake, she realized he didn't want any of that. Thank you, she said simply, taking his hands for everything. You did the hard part. Jake said, I just got you here. You sacrificed your ship and nearly your life. Ship can be fixed. Jake said, already got your engineers working on it. Syrah shook her head in amazement. Most people would ask for wealth. Power? A fleet of ships? I'm not most people. Jake said, I'm just a cargo hauler who did what needed doing. No, Syrah said firmly. You're the human who reminded an entire empire what honor means. She gestured to the vying, assembled crowd of nobles and military officers. You showed us that technology and power mean nothing without the courage to stand for what's right. She turned to General King. Issue an imperial decree. Jake Morrison of Earth is hereby named a friend of the realm. He and all humans are granted safe passage through Vulcaran space and the friendship of our empire. The crowd erupted in applause. Jake looked uncomfortable with the attention. Really? The ship repairs and fuel would have been enough. Syrah smiled. The galaxy is changing, Jake Morrison. Species that ignored humanity now want to know what makes you different. What makes you willing to risk everything for strangers?